In the 1980s, Vietnam was in an important period of domestic reform, and at the same time, with the support of the United States, it broke out a territorial dispute with China in the South China Sea. Remarkably, Vietnam actually cooperated with more than 50 countries to illegally exploit oil resources in China's South China Sea region, with a total cumulative amount of more than 100 million tons. What is even more surprising is that Vietnam has become one of the world's major oil exporters with the oil stolen from China. However, as China's national strength continues to grow, China has begun to take a series of countermeasures against Vietnam, including military expulsion. By 2018, China issued an announcement prohibiting foreign oil companies from mining within the 9-dash line, a move that caused Vietnam's illegal mining plan to suffer losses of up to $980 million. So why did Vietnam take the risk of stealing China's oil resources? And how did China make Vietnam pay billions of dollars in this game? If you like our video content, please click to subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can receive all our latest video content. Now let's get into today's topic. For a country with a population of more than 1.4 billion, the demand for natural resources such as oil is huge. In 2023, China's oil market has seen a full recovery, and all indicators have set historical records. The annual oil consumption was about 750 million tons, and the crude oil processing volume reached 743 million tons. Both figures hit a record high, with a year-on-year increase of 10.7%. It is expected that by 2024, China's oil consumption will further increase to 760 million tons, a year-on-year increase of 1%. The consumption of refined oil is expected to reach 400 million tons, an increase of 0.3%. However, there are hidden concerns behind these impressive data. According to existing data, China's remaining recoverable oil reserves are about 3.85 billion tons. At the current consumption rate, these reserves may only last for about 5 years. Of course, in addition to relying on about 70% of annual oil imports to maintain domestic development, China has also been actively exploring more oil resources. As early as the 1960s, American marine geologists first revealed in a research report that the South China Sea is rich in oil and natural gas resources. Preliminary estimates show that the South China Sea may have about 20 billion tons of oil reserves and 12 trillion cubic meters of natural gas reserves. This discovery quickly earned the South China Sea the reputation of the Second Persian Gulf. But over time, advances in exploration technology and further investigations have made this estimate more precise. In 2024, the latest data released by the China Energy Administration showed that the oil and gas resources in the South China Sea far exceeded initial expectations. So far, more than 200 oil and gas structures and about 180 oil and gas fields have been discovered in the South China Sea. The results of the reassessment show that the region's oil reserves have reached a staggering 55 billion tons, while natural gas reserves are as high as 20 trillion cubic meters. If these resources can be effectively developed, the South China Sea will be able to become a key guarantee for China's energy security. But from the current technology, it is not easy to fully develop the oil and gas resources in the South China Sea. Because compared with other oil-rich marine areas in the world, the seabed situation in the South China Sea is much more complicated. Of the 55 billion tons of oil and gas reserves in the South China Sea, more than 70% are buried in deep waters below 500 meters. These areas belong to deep-sea and ultra-deep-sea oil fields. What is more difficult is that most of the oil reservoirs are located at the intersection of the Eurasian Plate, the Pacific Plate, and the Indo-Australian Plate, and the geological structure is extremely complex. If the technology is not up to standard, once an offshore oil field accident occurs, it will not only cause serious oil spills and casualties, but also cause great damage to the marine ecological environment. Therefore, only when the technology is fully mature and the risks are controllable is it suitable to carry out such high-risk operations. Precisely because of the huge technical challenges, China did not begin to try to develop the South China Sea oil fields until after the 21st century. However, while China suspended the development of oil in the South China Sea, Vietnam quietly took the opportunity to steal more than 100 million tons of oil resources. What happened behind this? In fact, as early as 1968, the United Nations issued an exploration report on the South China Sea, confirming that China has rich oil and gas reserves in the South China Sea. This discovery is undoubtedly a huge treasure for small Southeast Asian countries with scarce resources. Since the South China Sea has been located in a remote area since ancient times, although it borders Southeast Asian countries, it is far away from the Chinese mainland, which also makes the South China Sea region often become the target of neighboring countries, especially Vietnam and the Philippines. Against this background, Vietnam began to secretly plan to steal China's oil resources in the South China Sea. Initially, Vietnam took relatively covert measures. In the name of research, they sent relevant research institutions to survey the South China Sea area. This behavior did not arouse China's special vigilance. After all, international scientific research cooperation and survey work are very common. However, Vietnam's real purpose is to accurately locate the location of China's underwater oil fields in order to prepare for the subsequent oil theft plan. After completing a series of surveys and confirmations, Vietnam found that it did not have enough technology and equipment to exploit these oil fields. So, they began to attract foreign investment by introducing various national preferential policies, but no country was willing to cooperate actively at first. Until 2000, Vietnam further relaxed its policies and provided more favorable conditions in order to attract Western companies led by the United States. Vietnam stated that these foreign oil companies could hold more than 80% of the shares, while Vietnam itself would only retain 20%. Attracted by these attractive policies, Western oil companies soon showed strong interest. Next, Petro-Vietnam used these foreign capitals to quickly cooperate with the West to establish its own offshore oil and gas development projects. They built a large number of deep-sea oil pipelines in the South China Sea, directly connected to the oil wells in the South China Sea region of China, thereby realizing the illegal exploitation of these oil fields. At that time, China's satellite monitoring and detection technology was far less advanced than it is now, and those oil pipelines buried deep in the seabed were naturally difficult to be discovered in time. Vietnam used these secret means to significantly increase its oil production by exploiting China's oil. Not only did it meet domestic demand, Vietnam even exported oil to other countries, which promoted its rapid economic development. From 2000 to 2016, Vietnam's annual average oil production reached 15 million tons. According to relevant Vietnamese data, since the beginning of this century, taxes on oil and natural gas have accounted for more than a quarter of the country's fiscal revenue, and more than 400,000 jobs have been created, making oil one of the important pillars of Vietnam's economy. However, by 2018, Vietnam's large-scale oil exports finally aroused China's vigilance. After all, Vietnam has a small land area and relatively limited marine oil and gas resources, but it can rely on oil exports as a pillar of economic development, which is obviously inconsistent with its own resource conditions. In response to Vietnam's illegal mining, the Chinese government has increased its management and supervision of the South China Sea region and set up Sansha City to be responsible for actual control and management of the South China Sea. It is worth mentioning that when China sent ships to the South China Sea for investigation, it was blocked by several Vietnamese ships. Vietnam claimed that the Chinese survey ship had invaded their continental shelf and demanded immediate withdrawal. However, China had already mastered mature satellite exploration technology at that time, and through this technology, it confirmed the oil theft pipeline secretly laid by Vietnam on the seabed. In order to ensure that the sovereignty and resources of the South China Sea are no longer infringed, China has fully deployed multiple marine monitoring stations within the Nine-Dash Line and dispatched Coast Guard ships and warships to crack down on Vietnam's illegal oil and gas theft. Faced with such a tough attitude and strong military strength of China, Vietnam finally had to choose to withdraw. Of course, Vietnam is not the only country that covets the resources of the South China Sea. Therefore, China has stepped up patrols in the South China Sea and announced that it will build a military base near the Paracel Islands. This series of tough actions forced Vietnam to stop its illegal mining. In 2018, China even issued an announcement requiring foreign oil companies operating within the Nine-Dash Line to stop all mining operations. Most of these companies have signed economic agreements with Vietnam and originally planned to obtain oil resources from the South China Sea. However, with the promulgation of China's strict order, these illegal oil mining activities were completely stopped. As a signatory to the agreement, Vietnam has to bear economic compensation for these foreign companies. It is reported that Vietnam will need to pay more than $980 million in liquidated damages to compensate oil companies in Spain and the United Arab Emirates alone. This is undoubtedly a heavy blow to Vietnam, which relies on South China Sea oil resources for economic benefits. It is worth mentioning that in 2021, China's independently developed 100,000-ton deep-water, semi-submersible production and storage platform, Deep Sea No. 1, was officially put into use in the South China Sea. The opening of this important facility marks that China has successfully broken through the technical difficulty of 1,500 meters in the ultra-deep sea in the exploration and development of marine oil resources, making China take a key step in the development of oil and gas resources in the South China Sea. By 2022, China's oil production in the eastern South China Sea oil fields has reached 14.6 million tons, and the western South China Sea oil fields have also contributed 5.15 million tons, totaling about 19.75 million tons. Although the southern waters of the South China Sea have the richest oil and gas reserves, the area is far away from the Chinese mainland and the development cost is extremely high, so large-scale development has not yet been carried out. With the operation of these deep-water platforms invested by China in the South China Sea, it has obviously become very difficult for Vietnam to rely on the oil resources in the South China Sea to make profits. To not miss out on our future projects and news updates, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We will continue to provide you with more exciting and interesting content.